Somewhere around 25% of forest cover loss is when the forest starts to go into a tailspin, losing its capacity to generate enough rain to be a rainforest and starting to have less and less rain circulation to where over time it can become a savanna. That process might take 50 to 70 years, but the point of no return happens around the time when the 25% threshold is crossed. We are at that point now.
Welcome everyone to this presentation in Biodiversity for a Livable Climate's Life Saves the Planet series. I want to thank our hosts, the GBH Forum Network. It is almost 2 years that we've been partnering and making presentations about restoration and in general about how life indeed saves the planet. This is the second presentation that we are offering with the Eco-Restoration Alliance. And I'm simply going to be introducing you to John Schull. John Schull introduced Bio for Climate to the idea of building a collaborative network of ecosystem restorers, and it has grown with remarkable speed. And you'll be hearing one of the remarkable efforts and concerns that we bring to you. So right now, I am turning this over to John Schull. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Paula. We have two great guests today, so I'm not going to take much time up front. I do want to remark that we are increasingly aware of how interconnected everything is. But it keeps on hitting us over the head, and I think in the years to come, it's going to become harder and harder to ignore. Our first guest, Rob DeLate, describes it as a matter of the living earth being in danger of organ failure. And he's going to explain how he came to that perception from his vantage point, first traveling the world and then in the Amazon, which he describes as a critical point that is either going to get fixed or the patient will die in the not too distant future, the patient being the planet that we all depend on. Meanwhile, our second guest, Atossa Soltani, is actually founder of the Amazon Headwaters Project and has got some really valuable reports for us about what's happening on the ground. And then we're going to notice how it's all interconnected. This is not just a story about one little corner of the world. It's a story about how one of a few legs of the table is in danger of rupturing, and then the whole table falls. So we need to focus on the critical point. I'll use that to frame the discussion and then ask Rob to introduce himself, tell us how he got to his realization about the current state of affairs, describe the planetary system, and then we'll move to Atossa's focus on the ground in the headwaters of the Amazon before we zoom out and look at how all of this relates to all of us everywhere. Rob?
Thank you, John. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for GBS Networks and Paula for organizing this session. So a little bit about me. Actually, I'm talking to you from the rainforest, being at the Mata Atlântica rainforest. Brazil basically has two huge rainforests. The coastal one got destroyed actually through colonialism for a large part, but is more or less stable. I've been a climate activist for the last 12 years, operating from forests mainly on an internet line, which by the way means that sometimes my line could be a little bit slow. I hope it doesn't happen. And I've been part of a lot of organizations, founded the Global Climate School, and a couple of other organizations I've been involved in very deeply, including the rebels like Extinction Rebellion. But how did I come to the conclusion that I had to focus my efforts on the Amazon rainforest? It was a process of a couple of years where I realized that our planet is in trouble, our species is in trouble. And I was looking in all the analysis at a collapse of global complex human society. And I think these days now, it's more and more clear that that could happen. It's reverberating into the consciousness of more and more people. So that journey that I've been a part of for a long time had a special twist when in April of 2019, I was part of a presentation by Charles Eisenstein about the Amazon rainforest. And after that, I realized and got a very clear dream about it, that not only was the Amazon rainforest a crucial point in the global climate system, it was also at the point of failure and collapse. And at the same time, I also found out that with the global youth and the indigenous peoples, we would be able to regenerate it much faster than most people believe. So with that, maybe I can say a few things about the Amazon rainforest itself, because people don't realize the magnitude of this amazing forest. It is indeed a planetary organ. It is the size of the contiguous United States. It is by far the largest river system in the world. Its discharge is 10 times larger than the Mississippi, just to give you an idea. 80 times larger than the Nile. It's part of 9 countries in South America, and it has several tributaries that are larger than the Mississippi. It's such an immense system. But over the river itself, there are masses of humidity and rain and clouds that actually carry more water, or at least as much water as the river system itself. And the transpiration of the 400 billion trees that make up the forest, actually, they evapotranspirate such an amount of water per day that it is enough to, it's even more than the whole river discharges. So there's a huge amount of water actually in the skies. So as a whole, with these 400 billion trees, with these river systems and these cloud systems, you're actually looking at a planetary organ. It produces, the one thing that we know intuitively is that water cools. And that cooling of the water is actually, is very present. Water actually, when it evaporates, you have to use a lot of energy to get that water to the boiling point. So if you have 400 billion trees doing each 1,000 liters a day, that's a huge amount of energy that goes up into the sky, and basically it evaporates to the upper atmosphere, and there it dissipates into into the universe. And the total amount of cooling that is done by the whole forest is roughly half of the current climate imbalance globally. So just the Amazon rainforest as a cooling organ is crucially important for the balancing of heat on our system. And once it starts to die back, and it is starting to die back on the southeast side, then more and more trees will die, dry up, become tinder, and huge fires will engulf the whole forest within 3 to 6 decades. Those are not my words. Those are the words of Carlos Nobre, who is one of the recipients of the IPCC Nobel Prize of 2007. So I think with that, I hope that I've made it clear that the Amazon is actually a planetary organ of vital importance at the point of collapse. And if we don't stop it, basically the climate system worldwide will be affected to such a point that we can forget the Paris Accords, because just 300 gigatons extra CO2 will evaporate into the atmosphere. All in all, so many elements together that people have to understand that this is the most crucial climate battle on the earth right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. There are two other members of the Eco Restoration Alliance, Jan Pokorny and Michal Kravchik, who are really leaders in discussing and understanding the role of trees and water and heat exchange. And what you've just told us is that there's an air conditioning system the size of the entire contiguous United States, and it's failing. It's in danger of failing. And, we all know what happens when an air conditioner that's almost as big as a building fails. It becomes a very difficult building to live in. So, the message is really clear. The scope of this is hard to grasp, and your description is really very helpful. The magnitude of this air conditioning system is really hard to understand. The fact that there's that much water and even more water in the air above the liquid water is really important. Recognizing that all of that vapor is the air conditioning system and that it's in danger of failing focuses the attention. And so as we focus the attention, it might be good to talk to Atossa, who can talk to us more about those who are actually where the action is in the Amazon, what the situation looks like from there and what the prospects are for pulling this all back together before it's too late.
Thank you so much, John, and hello, everybody, and great to see you guys all here. And Rob, thanks for that intro. So a little bit about, I'll just start by saying a little bit about myself. I'm, been a longtime forest activist. I started literally in 1990, going to the first time, my first trip to the Amazon, where my eyes were opened and I realized that this is a planetary organ, and that, that basically what was happening to the Amazon, I couldn't believe that what I was learning about it. And I'm still always amazed to hear the statistics. In the Amazon alone, we're losing about 7 football fields a minute. And, that number has fluctuated up and down, but in the last several years, because of the policies of mostly the president of Brazil, but really all throughout the 9 countries of the Amazon, deforestation is on the rise. And, to understand that, the system that Rob is talking about is a system that is, that is ultimately like the life support system of planet Earth. And we were, when I first started doing this work in 1990, I worked with the Rainforest Action Network. And then in 1996, learning about the threats facing the Amazon, I decided to really focus deeply in the Amazon. And so I founded Amazon Watch, an organization that's been working for 25 years with Indigenous peoples to protect and defend the forests. And now I stepped down as executive director, but I continue to be the board president. And since I left Amazon Watch as executive director, I've been working in alliance with a coalition of indigenous nations in the headwaters of the Amazon, where the source of the Amazon. And there we've been working both on stopping the destruction of this incredibly biodiverse bioregion, but also advancing solutions for the permanent protection of this crown jewel, or this global gem of biological diversity and cultural diversity. And so I just want to say that in this 30 years of this journey, what we have seen is that we've seen that there's a greater awareness in the world, especially after the fires of 2019 and after Bolsonaro came to power, that the Amazon is really at the point of no return. And so what you heard about, what Rob talked about, the biotic pump, this ability of the forest to be a cooling system, and and an air conditioning system, and the rain machine for planet Earth, that system is reaching a tipping point of no return. So after the fires of 2019, a science panel of 200 scientists were convened to look at basically what the state of the Amazon is. It's like the largest assessment ever of the state of the Amazon, and the results were, also based on the work of Carlos Nobre and others, that the Amazon, that system that Rob talked about, every tree lifting up 1,000 liters of water a day and circulating rain from the atmosphere that comes into the Amazon basin, and then it's circulated many times until it's lifted up by atmospheric circulation systems and driving atmospheric rivers both into the southern cone, where something like 90% of the rain that falls on the southern cone comes from the Amazon, but also sending it northbound all across the northern hemisphere. We have in California, for example, spring rains that come from the flying atmospheric rivers of the Amazon. And that even some modeling shows that there's a relationship between moisture content over the Sierra Nevada and the rainfall patterns and drought patterns in the Amazon. So that whole system is at risk. So that the trees are the key here. The trees are the ones that are doing that work of recirculating the moisture and vapor. And we've already lost about 17% of the Amazon is completely deforested. Another 10% of the Amazon, this is as of just a few weeks ago, another 10% of the Amazon is, severely degraded. In other words, actually a bigger area of that is degraded, but altogether amounting to loss of 10% of forest cover through degradation and 17% through deforestation. Together, we're at 27%. Now, the fact is that when that scientific modeling shows when we reach a 25% threshold of loss of forest, that system that's recirculating all of this moisture and vapor, the trees that are doing all of this heavy lifting, begins to unravel, and the forest no longer generates sufficient rain to be a rainforest. And so then we start to see, a massive dieback of the Amazon. That tipping point is predicted, as Rob said, to basically lose over the next 3 to 6 decades up to 70% of the forest in the Amazon.
Atossa?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I just want to ask you to reinforce and restate a couple of things. First of all, you're telling me that our rain in the Western United States is coming to us courtesy of the Amazon right now. Did I get that right?
Some of it.
Okay.
In the springtime, the modeling shows that atmospheric rivers in the Amazon help drive rainfall all the way to Hawaii, all the way to North America, Mexico, US Southwest. The spring rains are traditionally seen as part of the atmospheric rivers from the Amazon, yes, and the moisture content. And modeling also shows if we lose the Amazon, California's hydrological cycle would completely collapse. The Sierra Nevada rainfall would be reduced by half, and that would be basically another tipping point for the northern forests. So and of
course, the California declared a state of water emergency just in the last few days. So this is not hypothetical. This is going on right now. But then you also said that you quoted a statistic of 27% and then a statistic of 25%. And I'd like you to go over that again, because they sound very close to each other, and they also make it sound like this is happening right now.
That's right. So basically the statistics are that somewhere around 25% of forest cover loss is when the forest starts to go into a tailspin, losing its capacity to generate enough rain to be a rainforest and starting to have less and less rain circulation to where over time it can become a savanna. That process might take 50 to 70 years, but the point of no return happens around the time when the 25% threshold is crossed. We are at that point now. We
are now at that point.
Yes. And so basically what we have to do is we have to declare an emergency around the life support system of planet Earth. We have to get into, the commitment to zero deforestation has been made. 140 countries decided during the climate summit in Glasgow to agree to reduce deforestation to zero deforestation by 2030. That's not soon enough. We actually need to, make that timeline faster. We need to get to zero deforestation by 2025, and then have a massive reforestation effort in order to get back that ground we've lost, to get back to below 25%. And so the safe limit would be around 20%. And we need 80% of the Amazon to be a functioning rainforest in order for the hydroclimatic system of the biosphere to continue to do what it does. And so,
okay. So I am sufficiently alarmed, and judging by the questions that have already come in, our listeners are sufficiently alarmed. But let me just preview the questions that we're going to want to make sure we get to before we're done. We don't have to address them right now, but they're all of a piece. One is, what about this Bolsonaro guy? Another is, we've been hearing about the Amazon for 40 years. Are we making any progress? And the third one is, hey, this is a crisis. We need a rapid response team. Who and what is the rapid response team? And it's a question well addressed for present company. So Atossa, now back to you. Why don't you start with the Brazilian situation, and we'll gradually expand out to the international situation.
What I can tell you is that I just came from Brazil during, I was at the encampment of over 8,000 indigenous people from every nation of the Brazilian, Amazon and other parts of the Brazil with indigenous nations from everywhere. That has been going on for several weeks. They've been camped out near the Brazilian Congress, demanding action, demanding emergency action to stop the tipping point, to have their rights respected, to ban mining, to create basically a pathway to sustainable development, and in particular protesting Bolsonaro and the ruralist parties' basically expansion of the agricultural frontier and this kind of wild west, let's go forth and deforest the Amazon so we can make it productive, which is a complete, mistake. It's a complete, it's a complete, basically, it's like your body saying, I'm going to mine my liver or my heart for some cash. It's like, it's totally the wrong thing, since studies have also shown that most of Brazil's GDP comes from regions that are nourished by Amazon rain and dependent on Amazon rain. So it's a completely wrong thing. So the indigenous people were there protesting, marching. It was super inspiring. They're calling for basically also indigenous candidates and political leadership that gets that the Amazon is important. Now, Bolsonaro has been a disaster for the Amazon. When I was there, there was a story that came out that basically said deforestation in the first 3 months of 2022 already was 65% higher than the year before. Already, so we are going the wrong direction between, cattle ranching, lots of large-scale agriculture, mining, which is now consuming about 10% of the Amazon basin, and also polluting headwaters, polluting rivers, large dams, roads. Most of deforestation, something like 90% of deforestation, happens within 10 kilometers of a road. So we've got to stop this expansionist idea of, progress that's really about industrial development.
So we have tens of thousands of indigenous people marching on the Capitol. There is an election coming up
in October. And also there'll be several rounds most likely. And Lula has come back into candidacy and is made an alliance, showed up to the encampment, made a commitment to stand with the indigenous candidates. And there are a number of indigenous candidates, including Sonia Guajajara, who is the head of the indigenous peoples of all of Brazil, APIB, the organization that was behind the organization of the camp. She's also running for office. So there are many indigenous candidates, including women, who are basically care about future of life, not just for their own, peoples, but for all of humanity. And so I think it's going to be an interesting election. I think that's a key election to watch, and we need to recognize that one of the key things we have to do is elect public officials who care, who get it, who are committed to the life support system of the planet.
Well, most of the people listening and watching this podcast are not in a position to vote. But it sounds like there's the possibility of a reversal of political power. You should talk to us about what the people in Brazil can do and are doing to turn the tide before it's too late. And then we should talk about what those of us who aren't there can do to make sure that our system doesn't go down with a faulty election, if you will.
Yeah, well, people in Brazil, I think, need to recognize that it's what's good for the Amazon is good for the economy. It's good for prosperity. It's actually the only thing that ensures the long-term prosperity of the people. It's not jobs versus forests. It's not, economy versus the Amazon. It's actually, we can show time and time again that an hectare of rainforest well managed, a standing forest economy that's based on the fruits of the forest, based on the richness of the forest, based on the healing medicinal properties of the forest, based on experiences and services that the forest provides, is actually more provides longer term prosperity than a hectare of forest cut down for cattle ranching or for logging or for industrial agriculture. And so part of it is we need to basically reframe this issue of economic prosperity and recognize that there's no economic prosperity without an ecological system that's underneath that economic prosperity. The rain machine, the systems of genetic agrobiodiversity. I mean, there's so much biodiversity that is useful for food products and medicines in the forest that we're basically literally cutting our nose to spite our face. So basically we need to educate the populace in Brazil that their future prosperity is tied to the health of the Amazon, and that Brazil has a responsibility, and all of the Amazon countries have a responsibility. They are the keepers of the vital heart, the hydroclimatic heart of the planet. And as keepers, as the stewards of the heart of the planet, they have a responsibility to the world to take care of it. And we in the world have a responsibility to make sure that our financial systems, our commodity markets, our corporations, the extractive companies that are mostly financed by Wall Street and based in the United States or Europe, the consumption of commodities that are contributing, that's fueling the destruction. We have to take control and we have to take responsibility for our role in the destruction. So we have to become, basically, we have to consume a lot less. Of course, this is a big thing. We can't just replace product A with product B. We have to reduce our consumption of energy, of meat, of minerals, and of oil and fossil fuels. We have to actually phase out fossil fuel production, because in parts of the Amazon, in the headwaters where I work and have been doing this work to promote solutions, most of the drivers of deforestation are coming from oil and mining. And oil drilling in the Amazon is just like the wrong thing. It's putting out emissions because of the fossil fuels. It's destroying forests and contaminating rivers and reducing the forest's ability to sequester carbon. So it's like a triple, quadruple whammy.
I was going to offer the metaphor that it's like trying to put out a fire by pouring gasoline on it. But that metaphor is not an exaggeration. What's actually going on is even more perverse than what I just described.
That's right.
So listen, you've just described the indigenous peoples who, of course, have understood their interdependence with the forest for hundreds, thousands of years. They get it. They have known how to do it. They're being displaced by these big economic interests. And they're putting their lives on the line because they have no choice.
That's right.
Now, as I understand it, soon we will have no choice also. So the question is, how do we recognize that we're all in this together? how do we understand the connection and how do we strengthen the connections between the Brazilians who get it and who are putting their lives on the line and the rest of us who need to get it and recognize that there's going to be one global solution or there will be no solution.
Yeah, you know, just on the indigenous people's rights, and maybe Rob, you can jump in as well. I mean, it's exactly that. In fact, science is just catching up with the traditional indigenous management practices and indigenous knowledge systems that exist in the Amazon that we're actually losing rapidly as we lose cultural diversity as well as biological diversity. So the indigenous, understanding of forest systems and agricultural productivity has actually helped to increase plant biodiversity in the Amazon basin. So indigenous peoples have actually positively increased, plant biodiversity in the Amazon. They've also shown that their territories have 1% lower deforestation rate than even national parks. And most of the deforestation rate is under 1% in indigenous territories, whereas many cases, when you look at satellite imagery, indigenous territories, especially like in the Xingu, when you look at the satellite imagery, it's like an island of forest surrounded by a sea of deforestation. They are the ones that are holding the line. They're confronting ranchers, they're confronting loggers. And as you said, Brazil and Colombia have some of the highest assassination rates in the world of environmental and indigenous rights activists.
So one of the questions that has come in is what kinds of nonviolent actions are available right now to protect and support the indigenous peoples and the people who, as you say, are literally being assassinated by professionals who are being paid. This all sounds very conspiratorial, but my impression is that it really is this way. Professionals who are being paid by the big corporations that stand to make billions by extracting mineral resources at the expense of the people and the forest. What nonviolent approaches are available?
Well, first of all, we have to support indigenous peoples in their battles to protect their forests. We have to help them, arm them with, monitoring, information about monitoring, technical information about monitoring their territories, including drone and satellite imagery and real-time data about what's happening in their territory. We have to arm them with lawyers so they can fight in the courts, in their national courts, but also we've been fighting in the international courts at the level of the UN and at the level of the Organization of American States in international tribunals. We have to basically advance indigenous rights internationally. And there's a new Escazú Convention, a new agreement by Latin American Caribbean countries that just went into effect a year ago that basically supports the protection of human rights of environmental activists and people who are on the front lines defending the earth. We have to give more resources to indigenous rights and indigenous peoples. Indigenous organizations have millions of acres. A third of the Amazon is indigenous lands. They are managing these territories without resources. They are governors of massive areas, and most national parks have, huge amounts of budget for protecting their national parks, but indigenous territories don't have resources. We need to fund indigenous peoples. We need to make sure that right now, less than 1% of conservation dollars goes to indigenous peoples.
Okay, so Atossa, my question is, and I want to give Rob a chance to put this in a larger context, but what is the mechanism by which we support those indigenous peoples and give them those resources? What is the mechanism? Is it sending money? And if so, to where?
Yeah, there are many indigenous organizations that can receive equivalent to tax deductible donations directly. They can get direct funding, but also organizations that they trust and they're in alliance with, like Amazon Watch and the Sacred Headwaters Initiative, which is indigenous led, are directly supporting these organizations, getting them lawyers and strategic plans and mapping tools and techniques and leadership training and helping them build their movements and tell their stories. So there are networks. We are in parts of networks of organizations that make sure funding goes directly to the ground. So be happy to guide. But foundations and philanthropic community need to put indigenous peoples on their boards and in as grant making, decisions, making grant making decisions, so that Indigenous peoples are at the helm helping designing the strategies, not just through intermediaries, but directly. So the Sacred Headwaters Initiative is made up of 30 Indigenous nations and over 11 Indigenous organizations that are basically in the governance of that initiative, working to permanently protect an area the size of the state of Oregon, and having life plans and, basically directing strategies on how to spend that money, where to invest it. Okay. And, of course, they need to build capacity. We need commitments. We need commitments at the level of donors and the public to directly support Indigenous peoples.
Okay, so I see that Kyla has been putting into the chat a number of links to some of these organizations. And we are doing what we can to spread the word. But Rob has actually galvanized our community, the Eco-Restoration Alliance, several other groups, by recognizing that this is the point of the spear. This is a particularly critical moment to try to organize for action, to change the awareness so that the entire planet can mobilize first around this critical organ, and then around the entire patient. And Rob, do you want to talk for a little bit about how this story that Atossa has told us is going to ramify and how we're going to try to shape it to go in the right direction?
Yes, I think one of the things we could also say on the positive side is that Atossa already mentioned it, that once you get a sustainable way of agroforestry, for instance, in that area, the economic output of an area is up to 10 times as high as the current fields of soybeans and other monocrops. So the economic model as such needs to change, and that will give Brazil and the other Amazonian countries a lot more income. The second one is that the world right now is completely focused on doing something about carbon, about our atmospheric carbon. Right now, the Amazon rainforest is a net emitter because of the damage that has been inflicted to it. But if we can get its vitality back, and technically that's possible within a decade or two, it would absorb something to the tune of maybe 10% of global current emissions. Now, the world needs to pay for that. The world wants to pay for that. And if those mechanisms are becoming more easy to assess and to get into, then we could maybe have as much as 1 million people, especially rural poor around the Amazon area, to get actually paid for the eco services that they deliver. And people think a lot about carbon, but we are also talking about biodiversity, but also the eco services about water. Right now, we were very lucky because we have 2 years of almost constant La Nina, which gives more precipitation over much of South America. But as soon as there will be an El Nino, we will see the complete fallout, and there will be droughts, enormous droughts, which affect agriculture, electricity production, and the fresh water for large cities like Sao Paulo, Rio, and others. So the damage would be enormous. Now, if we regenerate those forests with carbon credits, we could actually quite fast see the return of those stronger biotic pump movements and the invigoration of that flying river, which over the forest, which would irrigate areas as far south as Argentina, which would also help the world food situation, because actually right now we're in the middle of a food crisis, which everybody knew would happen. It's just accelerated by the Ukraine war. But if this food basket goes, South America is one of the food baskets, prices will rise worldwide, and it will bring mass hunger and protest and social conflict and migration. And specifically for the United States, we already mentioned that if the moisture that is coming from the Amazon to North America is not just the Amazon, it's also the areas of the Cerrado and the Pantanal and others. If that moisture increases again, actually the drought situation, both on the west coast of the United States and all the way to the Midwest, is probably going to improve. So there's so many reasons to actually invest in what I call quite often a Marshall Plan to turn the situation around there, also for the United States. Also from a point of migration, a lot of the migration that is happening is bringing a lot of tension to the political systems of the United States and similar in Europe. If people are in an area, in the tropical area where they can have a better life through agroforestry, and there's less extreme weather, then all these pressures will become less. And that doesn't go just for the Amazon forest, but it goes for all the tropical zone all the way up to Mexico.
So I just want to reinforce what I hear you saying, which is that one of the ways the flow of money into the Amazon is going to bring back the flow of water vapor out of the Amazon is through carbon credits. Yes. And carbon credits are, it's a complicated issue. And I just want to point out that while sequestering carbon and stopping emissions is not, sadly, a quick fix to the climate problem, because it's going to take a long time before atmospheric carbon comes back down. It will literally take centuries, even if we stop emissions right now. Carbon sequestration, which is what trees and forests do, and is what carbon credits are based on, is actually quite a good index of healthy ecosystem function. And so right now there's this strange convergence around carbon credits, but for very different reasons. On the one hand, people are focusing on carbon credits because it's a way of reducing emissions, and it is, but that's not going to solve the acute problem we have. On the other hand, it's a good way of measuring the health of ecosystems and rewarding people for developing new ecosystems. And so that creates an opportunity for the powers that be, those who have money to spend on carbon credits, to send an ongoing stream of dollars into the Amazon to support the indigenous peoples that we've just talked about, who will grow trees and protect trees, therefore restore the water cycle, and then water will flow back to strengthen the economies of South America and California, which is to say, just to reinforce today's theme, it's all connected in fact, and it needs to be connected economically as well as hydrologically. And in some ways, that's what your Marshall Plan is trying to achieve, trying to mobilize everyone to understand the connection and to reinforce a virtuous cycle this time between dollars, carbon, water, and life.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So,
we can improve well-being of tens and hundreds of millions of people by restoring the biomes of South America, and that goes all the way up to California and the Midwest. Indeed, that improvement.
So we have 15 minutes left, and I just want to review the questions here. One of them says, is there a way gringos can support environmental candidates in the next Brazilian election? Tell Atossa, we're not stupid. Appearances notwithstanding, Atossa, we're not stupid. What's the answer there?
I think it's through communication. That's how, obviously foreigners can't influence domestic candidates through donations, but you have friends in Brazil, you have connections there, you can support communication through communication and media attention. We can support the candidates that are basically pro-living systems, pro-Amazon, and we can support the indigenous peoples who are running for office by helping them get a greater profile. helping do a documentary on them, do a story on them, write about them, get their stories out, and not just in the US audience, but target, there's so many Brazilians that live in the United States and outside of Brazil that can also vote. And the important thing is to also get the young people to have hope and to vote, because obviously, even in this country, in our own, midterm elections, the young people are going to decide the fate of the next elections in this country and whether we have climate friendly politicians or not. And so, that's what I would say. And I think that, the other question around, how we support leadership. I mean, leadership, we need to empower women. We see over and over again that women's leadership is what turns things around in terms of environmental policy, human rights, transparency, corruption, all of the issues we care about turn around when we have women leadership. And so supporting women's leadership is really key, especially now.
Well, so another one of the questions that came in basically says, how plausible is it that indigenous people or any people can actually regenerate and protect the Amazon? In truth, one of the motivations for the Eco Restoration Alliance is our recognition that the answer to that question can be found all over the world, that there are men, but in particular women, and people of all creeds and colors, but particularly indigenous people who know how to do it and have done it and have been able to reverse these situations in areas as diverse as parts of the Amazon or Egypt or every continent, just not enough of them well enough. So can you tell us about some success stories that we can build on? And Rob, this goes to you too.
I would say that indigenous peoples have done a great job of defending, forests. I've worked in the headwaters region, for example, with indigenous nations who have stopped through legal action, through resistance, through sheer, unwavering opposition, destructive projects, and have protected forests. So they are forest protectors, first and foremost. And secondly, I think that there's work happening right now in bringing food forests and food systems and agroforestry, and indigenous peoples have that knowledge. By the time an adult person in an indigenous community, in a traditional community, by the time they're, in their 50s, let's say, they already know how to identify somewhere between 300 and 500 plants, how to use it, what they're good for, where did they grow, how is it regenerated, how to find its seeds. I mean, these are the scientists. We have indigenous peoples are the scientists of the knowledge systems that have maintained the forest. So we have to invest in the intergenerational transfer of that knowledge and also the application of that knowledge. So in the sacred headwaters, we created a bioregional plan for the permanent protection of this region. And the bioregional plan can be downloaded on the Sacred Headwaters website. It is an ecological transition plan based on indigenous cosmology of well-being and living forests, and also the idea of life being sacred. And so based on that, we actually did a ton of research that looked at everything from forests, exactly where needs to be reforested to ensure connectivity, to ensure resilience, and to also replace species that are being depleted. So we have identified over 8 million hectares of rainforest in the sacred headwaters bioregion that need to be restored, or ecosystems that need to be restored. Now, even indigenous peoples who do reforestation have never seen, nothing of this scale has ever been done. So we need to bring the wisdom and knowledge of indigenous peoples together with our, technology and scientific thinking to combine into a, Marshall Plan, as Rob would say, to do this large-scale restoration, and to recognize that large-scale restoration is going to can be the engine, the economic engine for finding the living forest economy. But we need to do a couple things. One thing we need to do is just realize that our current economic model, the current extractive resource extraction, industrial, export-oriented, commodity-based economy that's also increasing, constantly indebting the countries. These countries in South America have somewhere around 100% 60 to 100% of their GDP is equivalent of 60 to 80% of their GDP is in debt, external debt. So they are mortgaged as forests. They're paying interest on this debt to external, to the IMF, to China, to Credit Suisse, to all of the financial institutions. That is basically straitjacketed them to continuously extract resources from the forest. So we need solutions like debt relief and a large scale for biodiverse countries. We need solutions like creating basically well-being indicators that support countries doing things towards well-being, health, resilience, ecological returns. And
okay, so
I think it's important to know at this point where the dieback will be unstoppable within 5 to 10 years, according to people from the Brazilian NASA, INPE, that we have a couple of strategic areas still the size of small European countries. I mean, nothing to laugh about, but it's not the whole Amazon that we have to do. And there's a specific area on the northeast part, which if we reforest there, the theory says that it will draw in much more humidity from the Atlantic Ocean. And once that starts coming in, it will actually rain out over an area about 1 million square kilometers. I don't know how much that is in square miles, but anyway, something the size of Texas or something like that. So then you do a part which draws in, basically you change the climate through planting trees. And if you do that in strategic places, where Atossa is working in the Andes, on the northeast side near the coast to draw in that moisture, and on the place where most of the damage is done in the southeast of the forest, because that dieback of the trees is starting to happen more and more because there already the precipitation has gone down. So if we do these three areas, these interventions, then I live here in a rainforest valley, and I've seen within years how fast a rainforest can regenerate and change the microclimate. And there's vast tracts. We're talking, for instance, 12 million hectares in between those two areas I just described, which are basically right now not used. If we would just protect them and let them alone, that would add another 12 million hectares to the system. So we have a strategic, the first draft of a strategic plan that we can apply starting the 1st of January when we have the new president in Brazil.
So Atossa's group, Amazon Sacred Headquarters, has this bioregional plan. You've identified 2 other regions that are in need of critical attention. We've identified several mechanisms by which we can begin to strengthen a positive loop among these regions and between the flow of money and the flow of water. And the Eco-Restoration Alliance, some of your fellow members like Marcel, are indeed trying to engage the IMF and some of these insurance companies in order to remove these straitjackets. Can you tell us anything about, if you will, the geopolitical prospects for stitching this together in a way that will pull us in the right direction?
Well, I think it's very clear to say that right now the insurance business will go out of business because of the increased damage from weather extremes, and they know that. And if we restore something like the Amazon rainforest, there will be a remarkable amount of extreme weather events that will become less damaging. We're talking floods, we're talking droughts, heat waves, and one that is almost not to believe, but is really true. If you draw in more moisture from the Atlantic Ocean because the forest starts pumping better, the hurricanes that come off the coast of West Africa actually get less energy to hit the Caribbean and the United States. So the models say that the damage from these models, from these hurricanes, will even go down. So it's the insurance industry that actually has a stake in the game to help these ecosystems revive, because it will help them with their business model, as an example.
So we have a big challenge, is to get all of these parties to recognize that our fates are intertwined, that the incentives have been perverse, yes, that the party is over, and that we need to clean up the mess, and we need to find another way to party. Like, for example, running around in the forest and really enjoying the amusement park that Darwin and nature has given us, rather than trying to build ones out of steel technology, glitz, and hype. I do think that people like Atossa, people like Rob, the Eco-Restoration Alliance, people who are putting wonderful comments and questions into this discussion, have the potential at this particular moment in human history to turn the tide, to make a really big difference. That's the good news. The good news is that it is potentially an inspirational moment. Potentially, we all get to be heroes for millennia. Or we go down in history, as the people who were sitting around moaning about a situation and failing to solve it. And there are going to be fewer people reading that history than there will be the happy history. So I think we really have to get our act together and figure out how to connect. And look, this is how broad it is. We have to connect the indigenous peoples, millions of people on millions of hectares, with billions of people watching this situation nervously around the planet, and thousands of policymakers, and dozens of trillionaires or multi-billionaires, and suggest that there are new alliances, which are probably the only alliances that will assure that any of us have grandchildren living in the world we want for them. It's, as far as I can understand, it's still within reach, but just barely. And so the conversation that's going on in the chat and in the Q&A is something we should figure out how to continue, how to extend, and how to amplify. And in a sense, that's what increasing numbers of people are getting together to try to do. I guess I'd like to give a commercial for ecorestorationalliance.net, because we're the group that's trying to pull that together. And I want to invite Atossa and Rob to also identify areas that you think people should point to, because I think we will have motivated a few more people, and we are putting out a message that needs to include a way to be a part of the solution.
Maybe I'll jump in here and say that, yeah, we need to figure out how to become good cells in the body of a living earth that recognizes that as good cells, we keep ourselves alive while keeping the host alive, to recognize we have a host, to bring that mindset, from that mindset, realize that the earth is this living system, and that what we do to the earth, we ultimately do to ourselves, and to find ways to align economic prosperity with the flourishing of life and well-being. The fact is that to go from a life-blind economic system to one that's life-seeing, then we can have this flourishing of life while we also prosper. And that prosperity has to be inclusive. It has to be just on every, if you have a bum foot or even a bad toe, your whole body suffers. You have to recognize that prosperity and justice and peace and those things matter to the health of the whole. So we need that, and we need to do it guided by indigenous wisdom and traditional knowledge in an urgent way. We need to be good consumers, good citizens, with exercising our muscle for getting the right politicians, good investors, and recognize what we consume, where our money spends the night, all those things, holistic. We also need public policies, and we can't just do individual action. We have to have public policies, and we need to hold corporations to account for their legacy. ecological debt, and those things. So yeah, the more we connect the dots, and we have to get in better at the science of complexity. We are working on transformation of whole systems. And to do that, we need new values and ethics, but we also need, basically inspiration and joy and fun, and make this, and beauty. And so that's what I would say. Get involved. I put a bunch of links in the chat, and happy to talk to anyone who has ideas.
That's great.
How to expand this.
Thank you very much. And not only would that be nice, it's probably necessary. So, we got to do it. Rob, do you want to add anything here?
Yeah, very practically. I mean, the United States is the financial and technological superpower of the world. And I think those two instruments are needed now in the situation of emergency. If we want to become firefighters, first responders, to avert the dieback of an area the size of the United States or a contiguous United States, we will need also supporting technology, both satellite technology, Web3 technology, etc., and finance to stream to the system, so we can actually employ at least 1 million people to start working and give them the knowledge and access to the information that is needed to regenerate. I think that's
I agree with that. I want to say that another website to call people's attention to is Bio for Climate, climate.org, which has been gathering together many of the people we have here today, and talks and articles and papers. And it turns out the science and the policy issues have been emerging and becoming apparent for the last 8 years. All of that information is available at bioforclimate.org. So this is an ongoing conversation. I want to thank Rob. I want to thank Atossa. I want to thank Paula. I want to thank GBH. I want to thank Bio for Climate. I'll let Paula have the last word, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you, John, for doing a wonderful job moderating the conversation. And thank you, Rob and Atossa, for bringing your concern and your passion and your vision and your hope for what's still possible to our audience. And thank you so much.